Imagine standing near the North Pole and hearing a crocodilian slide into a forest river. There is no permanent ice. Wet trees crowd the banks, turtles occupy the shallows, while large mammals push through the undergrowth. This was Ellesmere Island during the early Eocene, roughly 53 to 49 million years ago. It sat near 79 to 80 degrees north, yet supported a swampy mixed forest. The strangest part was not simply the warmth. Every winter, the sun still disappeared for months. How could a rainforest full of reptiles and large mammals survive that darkness? The evidence begins beneath layers of rock and frozen modern ground. Ellesmere Island's Margaret Formation preserves leaves, wood, pollen, bones, and teeth from an ecosystem that no longer seems possible there. Researchers have also found mummified wood and upright stumps near Strathcona Fjord. These are not trees that drifted north from somewhere warmer. They are remains of forests that grew in the high Arctic itself. Wet floodplains and swampy channels created favorable burial conditions. Although that also means the fossil record emphasizes damp lowlands more than every habitat that once existed nearby. One resident makes the climate especially difficult to dismiss: a crocodilian called Alognathosuchus. Crocodilians depend on environmental heat and cannot endure the kind of prolonged deep freeze seen in the Arctic today. Its presence alongside turtles indicates that winters generally stayed near or just above freezing. Fossils from Banks Island show that crocodiliforms also reached other parts of Canada's western Arctic, although those deposits had more marine influence. This was not one strangely warm puddle. Reptile-friendly conditions extended across at least part of the ancient high Arctic margin. Now comes the first major twist. The Arctic was warm, but it was not tropical in the usual sense. Temperature estimates for early Eocene Ellesmere suggest a mean annual value near 8 degrees Celsius. Winter conditions hovered around freezing, with uncertainty of several degrees depending on the proxy. That sounds cool for a rainforest, and barely tolerable for crocodilians. Yet, the critical difference was the absence of sustained severe frost. The forest could remain humid, rivers could keep flowing, and cold-sensitive reptiles could persist. It was a mild polar world, not a steamy jungle transplanted unchanged from the equator. The forest itself mixed forms that would look familiar with combinations that now seem misplaced. Conifers rose above broadleaf vegetation along wet channels and delta plains. Fallen trunks settled into waterlogged sediment, where limited decay helped preserve wood, roots, and stumps for about 50 million years. These remains provide direct physical evidence of substantial high Arctic forests. Still, they are snapshots from preservation-friendly wetlands. Scientists reconstruct the wider landscape by combining the wood with fossil leaves, pollen, sediments, and vertebrates, rather than treating one buried grove as a perfect map of the entire region. Among the trees moved Coryphodon, a large, heavily built mammal often described as hippo-like in overall form. It was a pantodont, not a hippopotamus, and its teeth record something remarkable. Seasonal patterns in tooth enamel indicate that Coryphodon remained above the Arctic Circle year-round. During the productive bright season, it could consume softer vegetation. In the dark winter, it likely shifted toward tougher foods such as twigs, leaf litter, or evergreen material. That flexible herbivorous diet, not hibernation or yearly escape south, is the leading explanation supported by its isotopic record and anatomy. But surviving cold was only half the challenge. Ellesmere still experienced extreme changes in daylight. Summer brought weeks of continuous light, driving a rush of plant growth. Winter brought prolonged darkness, even while temperatures remained relatively mild. Plants stopped producing fresh leaves at the same rate. Rivers darkened beneath the canopy. Coryphodon faced declining food quality, while Alognathosuchus had fewer opportunities to warm itself. This ecosystem therefore depended on animals tolerating a dramatic seasonal crash in light without facing the lethal deep freeze that controls the modern Arctic. Coryphodon was not the only large mammal navigating that cycle. Tapir relatives, including Arctic forms associated with Heptodon and Thuleodonta, lived in the Margaret Formation. Brontotheres also occurred there. These animals belonged to mammal groups better associated with lower latitudes, yet their fossils appear in central Ellesmere. Their presence shows that the warm Arctic was not merely a refuge for a few hardy reptiles. It supported a complex megafauna. Forest corridors and favorable greenhouse conditions allowed mammal lineages to spread far north into landscapes later erased by cooling and ice. How do scientists estimate temperatures in a world this old? No single fossil acts as a perfect thermometer. Leaf shapes and plant communities provide one line of evidence. Oxygen isotopes preserved in vertebrate tissues provide another, recording aspects of water and seasonal temperature. Crocodilians and turtles add their biological limits because prolonged hard freezes would exclude them. When these independent clues converge, they support mean annual temperatures around 8 degrees Celsius and winters near or slightly above zero. The exact numbers remain uncertain by several degrees, but the overall conclusion is robust. Ellesmere was humid, forested, and dramatically warmer than today. Then the mystery widens from one island to the Arctic Ocean. Around 49 to 48 million years ago, enormous blooms of Azolla, a tiny floating freshwater fern, spread across parts of the ocean surface. Drill cores recovered from the Lomonosov Ridge contain extraordinary quantities of its remains. Azolla could not flourish in ordinary salty seawater. Its abundance indicates that the Arctic surface became unusually fresh and strongly layered, with lighter, low salinity water sitting above denser marine water. This was not just a warm forest beside a normal ocean. The entire northern water cycle was behaving differently. Fishbone oxygen isotopes and other microfossil evidence support episodes of major surface freshening. During Azolla-bearing intervals, estimated salinity falls to roughly 16 to 21 parts per thousand, compared with about 32 to 35 in the modern ocean. A largely enclosed Arctic basin, heavy river input, precipitation, and restricted exchange could have helped maintain this layered surface. The fern repeatedly bloomed, died, and sank. Its remains accumulated in seafloor sediments, creating a dark archive that ocean drilling would recover tens of millions of years later. Forest and ocean were connected by an intense greenhouse hydrological cycle. There is an important limit to that picture. Scientists debate whether the freshwater layer covered the whole Arctic Ocean continuously. Some evidence suggests that it may have been restricted in area, intermittent, or thinner than early reconstructions implied. Core location and age control affect the interpretation. The same caution applies to rainfall over Ellesmere. Some studies suggest strongly summer wet, monsoon-like conditions. Others indicate weaker seasonality and moisture spread more evenly through the year. The rainforest is real, but its weekly weather report remains unwritten. Evidence defines the world. Uncertainty defines its finer details. Even with those uncertainties, the broad reconstruction is striking. Greenhouse warmth reduced the temperature difference between the equator and poles. High latitudes warmed strongly, severe winter cold retreated, and humid forests expanded into the Arctic. That did not remove polar night or seasonal stress. It changed the threshold that determined which organisms could survive them. Alonathasuchus did not need modern tropical heat every day. It needed winters that avoided prolonged lethal freezing. Coryphodon did not need endless fresh leaves. It needed enough stored body energy and enough fallback vegetation to outlast darkness. This vanished ecosystem also demonstrates why fossil climate reconstruction needs many witnesses. A crocodilian bone establishes biological limits. Coryphodon enamel records seasonal behavior and water chemistry. Leaves and pollen reveal vegetation. Mummified stumps prove that trees grew on site. Fish debris and azala in ocean cores expose changes beyond the coast. Each clue has biases, but together they form a coherent scene. An ice-free, humid high Arctic occupied by reptiles, turtles, birds, tapir relatives, brontotheres, and large pantodont mammals. The wild reveal survives because separate archives tell compatible versions of the same story. Today, Ellesmere Island is dominated by tundra, glaciers, and intense winter cold. The Eocene forest did not vanish overnight. Long-term climate cooling eventually dismantled the conditions that sustained it. Its fossils preserve a warning and a wonder. Polar ecosystems can transform profoundly when temperature thresholds shift, and high latitudes can respond more strongly than much of the planet. Yet, this ancient greenhouse was not a direct copy of any modern future. It was its own world, reached through different geography and long-term conditions. Which Eocene Arctic resident would you most want to see?